Hi, this is Lisa with Coping with Yarn, and I'm going to record Dexter. Hi, Dexter! Dexter meeting E.T. Let's see what his reaction to E.T. is, since there was talk in a live about how our animals will react to an alien. Okay, let's see. Alien. Dexter meeting the alien. What would Dexter do? Ouch. Oh, he's afraid. Okay, Mooney, are you afraid of E.T.? Is she gonna swat it? Ouch. I think she thinks it's just as annoying as a dog. Okay. Hi, this is Lisa with Coping with Yarn, and okay, I will be starting Chapter 9 of E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial in His Adventure on Earth, a novel by William Conswickle. Upon the streets at nightfall, in addition to the pizza wagon, another van appeared, but it did not contain stacked boxes exuding the aroma of cheese and tomato. It was filled with audio snooping devices sensitive enough to impress even an intergalactic traveler, and the operator at the illuminated control panel had a large ring of keys at his belt. Floating in upon him were voices familiar to us by now, the voices of the neighborhood. Mom, to make cookies, is a cup of milk the same as a cup of flour? And, just get out of my life, will you? And, I'll be babysitting tonight. Jack, if you want to come over. The van moved slowly down the block, scrutinizing every voice, every conversation that took its place in the jigsaw puzzle of the neighborhood night. Peter says the Redskins were defeated, Wendy and the boys captured, and his communicator is finished, Michael. We can take it out and set it up. The man with the keys waved his hand and the van came to a stop. You know, Elliot, he's not looking too good lately. Don't say that, Michael. We're fine. What's this we stuff? You say we all the time now. It's his telepathy. I'm so close to him. I feel like I am him. And to the ordinary snooper, this conversation would have been passed over as just a child's world of fantasy. To this particular snooper, it was as potent as a signal from Mars. The street map was brought out, and Mary's house marked with a large red circle, and the van moved off down the block as a pizza wagon turned the corner. Elliot explained Halloween to E.T. as best he could, pointing out that this would be E.T.'s only chance to walk around the neighborhood in plain view. Because everybody will be looking weird, see? Hey, I'm sorry, E.T., I didn't mean that you were weird, just different. Spell different, said E.T., as Elliot put a sheet over the old Voyager's head and huge, furry bedroom slippers over his paddles. The outfit was topped off by a cowboy hat. Looks good, said Elliot. We could take you anywhere. Elliot's own costume was that of a hunchbacked monster to blend in with E.T. and make the space goblin less unusual. Michael, downstairs with Mary, was having some difficulty with his costume. No, said Mary, and that is final. You are not going as a terrorist. But all the guys are. You won't get 4 blocks in this neighborhood dressed like that. Please? No, and where's Gertie? She's upstairs getting ready with Elliot. But Gertie was not getting ready with Elliot. She was sneaking out a window. Elliot turned to E.T. Mom will never know the difference if you just keep quiet and shuffle along in your sheet, okay? You're Gertie. Got it? Gertie, said the old monster, and shuffled along in the sheet with Elliot down the stairs. Mary was waiting for them below. In an act of insane Halloween fervor, she'd gotten into a costume herself, wearing a leopard pattern dress and an eye mask, as well as carrying a star wand with which to strike unruly trick-or-treaters on the head. "Gee, Mom, you look great." "Thank you, Elliot. That's very nice of you." But not only Elliot was admiring her. The aged monster, disguised as Gertie and safely hidden inside a sheet, stared at Mary in wonder. For she looked like a star creature, celestial, more beautiful than ever. "Gertie," she said, stepping over to him, "that's a wonderful costume. How did you get your stomach so fat?" She patted the great pumpkin shape, and the elderly voyager sighed faintly to himself. We patted it with pillows," said Elliot, nervously. "Well, it's very effective," said Mary, "but let's put this cowboy hat at a more rakish angle." Her hands came tenderly to the extraterrestrial's turtle-shaped head, and within the sheet his cheeks blushed as her fingers touched him. Delicious streams of energy flowed out of her, down his ostrich neck. His heart light came on, and he quickly covered it with his hand. "There," said Mary, "that's better." She stepped back and spoke to Elliot. "Watch over her, and don't eat anything that isn't wrapped, and don't talk to strangers." Michael stepped into view, his terrorist costume modified. "And don't eat any apples, because they might have razor blades in them. And don't drink punch, because it may have LSD in it." Mary leaned in, kissed both boys, and then kissed the space goblin. His duckish knees buckled and his subcutaneous circuitry fluttered. Lights as beautiful as Orion's nebula went off in his brain. "All right," said Mary. "Enjoy yourselves." Elliot had to drag the aged goblin off by the hand, for the creature was transfixed before Mary, as if looking at the birth of a star. He stumbled along in his bedroom slippers toward the door, but managed a last glance backward. "So long, honey," said Mary. "So long, honey," he said silently, cosmic love echoes resounding in his now twisted brain. They dragged him into the driveway and over to the garage. Gertie was waiting there in her sheet, and so was his beacon transmitter umbrella folded, and the components closed in a cardboard box. He looked at it and wondered momentarily if he really wanted to use it. Might he not be happier in the closet near Mary for the rest of his days? "Okay, E.T., hop on!" And they lifted him into the basket of the bike, attached his communicator to the carrying rack over the rear wheel, and pushed off down the driveway into the street. He rode in the basket, little legs tucked in, and stared at the parade of Earth children who walked along the street. Princesses, cats, clowns, hobos, pirates, devils, gorillas, vampires, and Frankensteins. Earth was truly an amazing place. "Hang on, E.T." Elliot felt the weight of the creature there in the basket, a small but significant being lost from the stars. Tonight was a mission, and it gave Elliot feelings he'd never had before, as he guided the handlebars and pumped the pedals, bearing E.T.'s weight along. He realized he wasn't a twerp after all. His twerpishness was leaving him, falling behind in the dark and being consumed by the shadows. He knew he was meant for this job, in spite of being nearsighted, sloppy, and depressed. With the surge of his wheels, he felt happy and free, and touched by the hand of outer space. He looked at Michael, and Michael smiled, braces shining on his teeth. He looked at Gertie, and Gertie waved, giggling at how E.T. looked, all crouched up on the pit in the basket, furry bedroom slippers sticking out. We're going to get him back up where he belongs, thought Elliot, looking toward the Milky Way. It shone through the telephone wires and the pollution, and it seemed to be singing softly. Odd, angling light glanced out of it, sheets and nets of cool flame that reached down and touched him, and then danced off and away. "Why, that's the most incredible costume I've ever seen," said the man in the hallway. His wife was beside him, and her eyes open in wonder, their children standing awestruck behind them, peeking out from between their parents' legs at the extra-terrestrial. E.T. had removed his sheet. In his cowboy hat and bedroom slippers, with his incredible eyes, stomach on the floor, and feet like a toad-shaped plant. He was certainly in a class by himself, as far as Halloweeners went. Each house they'd gone to had been like this, with a big fuss made over him. He liked it. He'd been in the closet for weeks, and now he held out his trick-or-treat basket and received a great deal of candy. "Just extraordinary," muttered the man as he accompanied them back toward the door, eyes glued on E.T.'s long, root-like fingers, which trailed along the hall carpet. E.T. stepped onto the sidewalk with his basket full with the treasure he collected in highest quality, nutritive wafers and drops, enough to carry him for days in space. There were piles of M&Ms and one especially powerful bar called a Milky Way, apparently for the longer voyages. "You're a hit, E.T., said Elliot, wheeling his bicycle along the sidewalk, the space being waddled along beside him, and Elliot felt the happiness coming from the old creature. Elliot knew what it was to be a freak, laughed at by people. He'd always been that kind of kid, as if his own nose were like a bashed-in Brussels sprout. But he didn't feel that way anymore. He felt older, wiser, and connected to the far-off worlds. Great thoughts came and went in his head, like comets, trailing fire and wonder. As for the aforementioned Brussels sprout, he had begun to notice that certain children were peeking in other people's windows. He tugged at Michael's sleeve and indicated his wishes. They crept along a lawn and peeked in a window. A man was walking around in his undershirt, a can of beer in his hand and a cigar in his teeth. The aged space creature smiled to himself, chin on the windowsill. If he could go out with his friends and peek in windows every night, life on Earth would be worth living. "Come on, E.T., whispered Gertie. "Come on with me." She led him quietly around the house onto the front porch and across the door. They pressed the doorbell and ran. His furry bedroom slippers flapped, one of them fell off, and he lost his cowboy hat. He cried out with joy. He was living now. He was a regular Earth person. "Faster, faster," called Gertie, and they ducked around some bushes panting, mist coming out of E.T.'s toes. The old Voyager was so excited his fingers worked all by themselves, making cosmic oversigns dealing with the innermost secrets of evolution in the universe. The entire row of bushes swooned and then bloomed, but the grand old botanist was already gone to the next house to soap the windows. In this way they moved from neighborhood to neighborhood. In the excitement, much candy was devoured, and the elderly Halloweener indicated his desire to collect some more. "Okay," said Elliot, "let's try that house over there." Elliot led them up the sidewalk, confident now that the outrageous figure shuffling beside him would be thought of as just another kid in a rubber costume. As for E.T., he no longer felt strange-looking. He began to think of his otherworldly form as just something he had donned for the evening. Inside, he was a human being, eating candy, ringing doorbells, shouting trick-or-treat, and rotating his nose. But as the door ahead of them opened, his eyes clicked in fear for the first time all evening, for on the other side of the door was a red-haired little runt he knew at once had to be Lance, about whom he had always been suspicious. Lance, for his own part, was very suspicious of E.T. "Who's this?" he asked, not assuming that these long arms, this bowling ball stomach on the doorstep were made of rubber. It's my cousin," stammered Elliot, ready to kick himself for not recognizing Lance's house, where they were now trapped, Lance advancing on them. "He's plenty weird," said Lance, taking another step closer, drawn by some force he couldn't understand, but deeply in tune with the freakish Voyager. "This boy," thought the ancient cosmologist, "is a nerd." "You go, E.T." He backed up, Elliot backing with him, Lance continuing to advance as they retreated, and hopped on his bike as they hopped on theirs. "Spell fast," said E.T., and Elliot pumped for all he was worth, angry with himself now for being so confident, for showing E.T. off to the world. But how can you keep a secret like E.T. from the world? You want to show him off, want to see people's jaws drop open. But you shouldn't show him to a nerdy kid like Lance, because nerds can't be fooled. A nerd knows a spaceman when he sees one. E.T. rode in the bicycle basket, head down, but feet sticking out. What will Lance do? Go on to the authorities? Will I, he wondered, be stuffed after all? Elliot turned and looked over his shoulder, back into the darkness. There were no signs of Lance, who probably couldn't pedal a bike very fast. "It's okay," he said. "We've lost him." But they had not lost him. By shortcuts known only to nerds, Lance sped along through the night, even in touch with his quarry. How did he know just when to turn and how sharp to cut it? Something was drawing him telepathically. He was tuned. He was in touch with ET system. He rode like a maniac, faster than the ordinary nerd ever dreams. Red hair pressed flat, jug ears sticking out. He wheeled like crazy in the moonlight, block after block, on Elliot's trail. His bicycle light was off. Only his reflectors spun patterns in the dark, but no one saw them. Lance felt hot and cool, and with it, for the first time. In his brief life as a nerdish youth, things never really turned out right, and he had just shuffled around and played electronic games with himself. But tonight his bike was boiling with power. He was skidding through turns like a professional rider. His buck teeth clicked with excitement. The wind blew over his cowlick, and the night was kind to him. He bounced over a curbstone, came down, squealing his wheels, caught sight of Elliot up ahead. Elliot's tail reflector caught in the glow of a stream lamp near the edge of town. "He's heading for the hills," thought Lance, and smiled to himself as his own bike zoomed beneath the street lamp, swift and silent, commanded by a cycler who couldn't miss the trail if he tried. He was beaming in, his whole forehead buzzing now. He leaned over the handlebars, feet spinning the pedals. Deep thoughts of space were appearing in his brain, and he felt he could almost glide into the sky. He smiled again, and the kids all laughed at him because he only ate Swiss cheese. But so what? What did that matter now that he was floating in this incredible power? He left the last street lamp behind and took the high road into the hills. Elliot looked back over his shoulder, but could not see his pursuer. He steered the bike off the highway onto the fire road and pedaled up it. The space wayfarer bounced in the basket, stomach pressed down the wire, fingers wrapped around it. Now that he was so close to the old landing site, his mind was racing. He must set up his communicator and begin signaling. Space was vast and time endless. Not another moment must be lost. But how slowly Elliot went now, barely moving the bike along.
"Elliot."
"Yeah?"
"Spell hang on."
The space wanderer moved his fingers, releasing a low-level and anti-gravity formula, and the bicycle lifted off the ground. It skimmed the bushes, then the treetops, and sailed on over the forest. Better, much better, thought the old voyager, and settled back in his basket. Elliot was frozen to the handlebars, mouth open, hair standing up. The bike wheels spun slowly in the wind, but his mind spun more quickly as he stared at the forest below. He could see the fire road and the path through the trees, and above and behind him, the moon gliding among silver clouds. Below, an owl was waking up and lazily stretching its wings. It smacked its beak, thinking of mice or possibly a bat to munch on. It lifted off into the air and flapped upward nonchalantly. Suddenly, its big eyes popped, and it went into a fiercely banking dive. What in the world? Elliot and his bike, with a space goblin in the basket, sailed on by the careening owl, who collapsed his wings and dove to the ground, where he crouched dumbfounded. At that moment, Lance came tearing toward him, and the owl spun around, nearly run down by the advancing nerd. "What's happening to the forest?" wondered the bewildered bird, but Lance had no time to answer. He was shooting onward, bike bouncing over roots, stones, branches. His head was filled with electronic beeps, echoing faintly, and he knew where to go. Homing in on a secret signal, the forest received him, its pathways opening gently, and the nerd glided through the places trained foresters might have gotten jammed in. But where was Elliot? The moonlight came in webs through the canopy of leaves, above which Elliot sailed, hidden from Lance and the world, sensed only by shocked, squeaking bats on the wing, who darted and dove as a bicycle flew through their domain. Elliot's feet worked the pedals slowly, nervously, the chain clicking in space. He'd always known in his heart that his bike would fly, and sometimes felt as he crested a hill, but the final touch of magic had always been missing until tonight. E.T. was that magic, and his magic was the science of space, so evolved that only the ancient could know it. It assisted their great ships, and it certainly could carry a mere bicycle a mile or so to the landing site. The ancient fugitive peered from his wire basket as the bicycle dropped toward the clearing. He controlled the descent with his delicate touch, and the bicycle slipped in over the grass and touched gently down, spilling only at the last moment when the elderly voyager's long toe got caught in the spokes. Ugh! The bicycle slid on its side, finally stopping on top of E.T. He climbed out of his basket, toe aching, but too excited to care. Elliot was picking himself up and now began unpacking the communicator. The ancient voyager turned away for a moment and scanned the clearing to see if any of those who had pursued him that first night were still lurking about. His sensitive inner radar moved along over the face of the forest, and it came to Lance and blipped right over him. Why? Because the nerd's emanation was now not unlike E.T.'s own. That of an outcast, a loner, a misfit, and E.T. just swept on by him, feeling no threat. He turned back to Elliot and signaled that they should begin setting up the transmitter. The circular saw blade turned like an enchanted dish, beside which knife and fork danced, advancing the teeth of the blade. What caused the enchanted turning? An armature, with spring attached, had been roped into a slender tree. As the wind bent the tree, the rope went taut, lifting the knife and fork ratchet. The teeth advanced, spinning on the saw blade, across which the bobby pins tracked, activating the Speak and Spell program. What powered Speak and Spell? Hundreds of wires, which the ancient botanist had taken into the trees. These wires were now the veins of leaves and branches and roots, tapping the electricity of life. How it was done, only the old botanist knew. But Elliot could feel the life of the force traveling through the wires, converging, powering the communicator. The overturned umbrella, lined with tinfoil, shone in the moonlight. But more than moonlight was reflected. The fuzz-busting microwave signal, driven by the UHF tuner, was beaming out of the parabolic shape into space. Geeple doople zwack zwack zoffen old man. Approximately. The true sound coming from the device was far more elegant. But our alphabet cannot convey the subtlety of those sounds. E.T. had wrested from the Speak and Spell. Elliot stood in the flow of the signal, hoping for its success. But it seemed so small, such a feeble thing, searching up there in the immensity. The extra-terrestrial, seeing his doubts, touched the boy's shoulder. We have found a window. We have? Our frequency is that window. It will reach them. They stood with the transmitter for a long time, both of them silent, and the stars seemed to listen too, and of course, the nerd in the bushes was listening. Mary, meanwhile, was trying to hold her own against the droves of little goblins who were visiting her. Yes, yes, come in. My, what a scary bunch this is. They sang for her, they did little dances, gooey gumdrops popped out of their mouths in the middle of tunes, and were mashed into the rug. Tuneful gesturing caused wet lollipops to be pressed into her textured wallpaper, peeling off the texture when they were removed. Harvey bit one of the little goblins, while the fearless watchdog was engaged in this molestation of an innocent child. Upstairs, a window was being opened in Mary's room, and a government agent was entering with an electronic device, whose flickering lights and wavering needle led him down the hall. The device began to grow excited as it entered Elliot's room. It went quite wild when it was taken into E.T.'s closet. After a few passes, the agent seemed satisfied and crept back along the hall out Mary's window, making a safe exit, while downstairs Harvey was having his snout tied with a handkerchief and the screaming child was being plied with chocolates.
Eeple doople zwack zwack.
Elliot and E.T. sat beside the communicator, listening and watching the night sky, while Lance, the nerd, watched them. The sky was silent and did not respond. After many hours, Elliot fell asleep, and Lance had to be home by 9 o'clock, so the old Voyager was alone with his device. He tracked the signal as it spread out and out into the darkness. He did not feel so well. Had he eaten too much candy? He strolled off into the forest and visited with the plants. His footsteps seemed a little heavy to him, heavier than usual. Perhaps it was from all the soaping of windows and running amok. He wasn't used to it. He walked until he came to a little stream, and he sat down beside it. The sound of the water was enchanting, and he put his head into it. He stayed this way for hours, listening to the artery of Earth's blood running. He fell asleep, finally, head underwater. "I guess he's about 4'4" or so," said Mary to the policeman. "A small person dressed as a hunchback." She began to weep. He's eaten a razor blade," she said. "I know it." Now, said the policeman. "Lots of kids get lost on Halloween. I'm sure Elliot is fine." Gray dawn had come to the neighborhood. Gertie and Michael had been home since 10 o'clock. Elliot's bed was empty, and Mary's mind was in shreds. Once again, she stared at the policeman through her tears. "I've been treating him terribly lately. I made him clean his room." "That's not unreasonable," said the policeman. Harvey tried to signal, but his snout was still tied shut. He put his paws on the door and made muffled whimpering noises. "Elliot!" Mary leapt up. Elliot was coming across the back lawn. In gratitude, she took off Harvey's muzzle, and the dog yowled with relief, working his jaws up and down. "Is this our missing person?" smiled the policeman. He folded his notebook, put it away, and left the family to the reunion. "You've got to find him, Mike, in the forest, somewhere near the clearing." Mary had to confine Elliot to bed, and E.T. was the missing person now. Michael went to the garage and took out his bike. In a few minutes, he was pedaling down the street, and a car was following him. Looking back over his shoulder, he saw 3 figures seated in it, all of them looking intently at him. He cut sharply into a narrow passageway between 2 houses, shook the car, and headed for the hills. He found E.T. head down in the stream. The old Voyager did not look so good, but he insisted that he was fine. He had only been listening. He gestured at the stream, at the sky, at many things, but to Michael he seemed pale, and his footsteps slow and heavy. All right, that's the end of Chapter 9. Till next time, folks.